Alright, what up, homies? It's the Tominator back with the highly anticipated part 2 of the most genetically gifted bodybuilders of all time. So, if you haven't already, go watch part 1, which covers numbers 10 through 6. I also explain there all the criteria we're considering when talking about what constitutes great genetics. But anyway, now it's time to finally count down the top 5, and as a bonus, I also threw in a bunch of honorable mentions toward the end. And I gotta say, most of you guys did a pretty good job with your guesses for who would make the cut here. A bunch of you managed to get like 3 or 4 right, though I don't think anybody went 5 for 5, so chances are at least one guy in this list is going to surprise you. But anyway, enough chitter chatter, let's get into it. So coming in at number 5 is Flex Wheeler, one of the most obvious examples of a genetically blessed bodybuilder. So obvious, in fact, you're probably shocked to see him this low, but hey, like I said in part 1, the order isn't carved in stone by any means. So you could easily flip-flop a couple guys here and there, and I wouldn't have a problem with that. It's very difficult to try and kind of disentangle the genetic factor from everything else that goes into being a champion bodybuilder, so there's a lot of guesswork involved here. But anyway, as for Flex, an interesting testimonial to his genetic prowess comes from Milos Sarcev, a former bodybuilder who competed alongside Flex in the 90s, now turned drug guru, personal training coach. But anyway, there's an interview he did with Dave Palumbo, and I'll put a link to that in the description, where Milos mentioned that he'd never seen anybody blow up as fast as Wheeler did when he worked with him briefly prior to the 2003 Arnold Classic. And this was Flex's last contest, by the way. So Milos was just like laughing at the fact that Flex could basically pick up a 20-pound dumbbell for curls and his arms would explode. He claims that Flex went from 208 pounds to 245 pounds in the span of only 3 weeks, if you can believe that. So if that's not a genetic freak, I don't know what is. And as we all know, Flex brought that roundness factor too. Look at this crab most muscular, it's just out of this world. He was never even known for having a good chest. He was always more shoulder dominant, but you would never know that looking at this. The thickness, the striations, it's just popping out at you like a 3D movie. And here he is next to Ray in the seminal 1993 Mr. Olympia, Flex's best year by far. Both of them were rocking razor-sharp Christmas trees back then, the likes of which you sadly just don't see anymore. And look at all the crisp feathering in his lower lats there, too. It looks like somebody chiseled that out of solid rock. And they didn't call him the Sultan of Symmetry for nothing. Other than a slightly lopsided set of abs, his symmetry was literally mirror image perfect. And if we're using that word in the broader sense of having great flow and balance and all that, then yeah, Flex was pretty much the epitome there. Plus, look at the back, bro. It's got more intricate detail than a topographical map of the Rocky Mountains. And I made another video already of the most aesthetic bodybuilders of all time, and Flex topped that list. So when this guy was on, there's just nobody better to my eyes. Even when he was off, you still gotta admit, that's a damn pretty physique. His only real weaknesses were his relatively narrow frame and some soft hams and glutes. He was notorious for holding water in these areas, and I've heard him attribute this flaw, and also his general conditioning issues during certain points in his career, to his kidney problems. As most of you are probably aware, Flex had to retire as a result of that and even received a kidney transplant. So technically you could say that's a mark against him there, as healthy and efficiently functioning organs are also an aspect of good genetics. And you might never have thought of that, but without super resilient organs, all the drugs these guys are taking are bound to fuck up your health. Though given that he was able to compete at the highest level for over a decade, I wouldn't penalize him here much at all for that. And then there's this picture, yeah. This shit is certified legendary status. Top 10 in the Bodybuilding Hall of Fame, full shizzle bizzles. Let's all just take a moment of silence to mire the lines, those delts, arms, and quads, and offer up a humble prayer to the sweet Lord of Aesthetics that we may all one day attain similar shapely gains. Amen. And next up at number 4, yes, we have the Arabic hype train, Big Ramy. I know a certain other popular YouTuber likes to hype him up every year based on some crazy post-workout photos, only for Ramy to show up at the Olympia and disappoint yet again. But still, regardless of how he places, you cannot deny he's an absolute genetic freak of the highest order. And it's not lightly that I put him ahead of guys like Flex and Lavroni, but when you can weigh in at over 300 pounds and still have a trim midsection with visible abs, that's something special, man. Big Ramy really deserves his name because this guy is just gigantic. We've never seen anyone who can put on so much quality mass so quickly. Not Nasser, who was always more on the blockier side, and not even Dillette, who was never this huge. Marcus Rule never had shape and balance like this, and even Ronnie could not achieve this level of size without drastically compromising his midsection. So yeah, this is truly unprecedented, and simply put, Big Ramy is a freak. Now, we all know that he suffers from shitty calf syndrome, but other than that, I don't see any major flaws. He's got probably the biggest thighs we've ever witnessed, and what's further amazing is that his upper body is able to keep pace because his arms are huge, the chest is massive, and that back is wide as a barn door. So let's just say he lucked out with one hell of a skeletal frame to hang all that muscle on. But the main reason I put him so high is because look how fast he blew up, man. These before and after pics just really tell a tale. I mean, he went from being big but still natty looking to a freaking monster among mass monsters in a span of just 3 years. So that's truly incredible, and there's no way you can do that without winning the genetic lottery. Here's another look, and you can see the guy's potential even back then. His structure is nearly perfect for bodybuilding. You just swap out his calves for, say, Cutler's, and let him add some more muscle maturity and really nail his conditioning, and you have the ultimate modern-day Olympian. So I totally understand all the hype surrounding Remy because the guy is so close to becoming the most dominant bodybuilder we've ever seen. He has the ability to simply dwarf anybody alive, as you can see him here putting Dennis Wolf to shame. Now, admittedly, Wolf was far from his best here, but still, you can't take anything away from Remy because that's an elite rear lat spread any way you look at it. If he could just dial it in a little more, especially in the lower body, he has all the potential to completely mop the floor with Phil, especially as Phil gets older and Ramy really comes into his prime. So I know many people don't like Ramy and they say he's overrated. They think his physique is ugly and not appealing whatsoever, but for my money, this is about as aesthetic as you can get for a mass monster. Aside from maybe Paul Dillette, who wasn't this big by the way. The shape and lines of Big Ramy are second to none for someone of his size. I don't really know what you guys expect. I mean, you're not going to have the flow and lines of a 230-pound flex wheeler when you're literally almost 100 pounds heavier at practically the same height. It's just not going to happen. But even if you hate the guy or don't personally like his look, you can't deny his genetics for bodybuilding are off the charts. The only reason I don't have him any higher is because the calves and the concerning fact that his progress has more or less tapered off in the past couple years. So by that I mean we haven't really seen him make any major improvements like what he was doing when he first exploded onto the scene just a few years ago, unlike the next two guys on this list. Take Ronnie Coleman, for example, by my estimation the third most genetically blessed individual in history. Now, you could easily put him in second or first even if you accept the claims about him competing naturally at the Mr. Olympia earlier in his career. Now, call me a cynic, but I think that's frankly a load of bullshit and nothing but a bogus myth. So sorry to all you believers out there, but personally, I just don't see how it's humanly possible to stand on that Olympia stage completely drug-free. Well, maybe back in the 60s or something, who knows, but certainly not by the time the 1990s rolled around. Shit was just too advanced and competitive by then. So hence one of the major reasons why he's in third and not first. But that debate aside, here was a guy whose only weakness was his midsection and calves. And even these weren't too bad in his earlier days, as we can see the abs looking on point here in the mid-1990s. And to make up for these few flaws, Ronnie had a slew of major strong points. The biceps for one, those peaks put even Arnold's to shame. The pecs and quads were also enormous, and the back, glutes, and hamstrings all go without saying. Plus, who was able to eat like this? What, like 5 weeks out of a show, I think it was? Fries covered in ketchup, chicken positively doused in barbecue sauce. The guy had so much muscle mass, he could probably eat nothing but KFC and McDonald's and still come in ripped enough to win. I mean, dude was swole as fuck. I'm surprised they didn't just call him Ronnie Swoleman. The vascularity was ridiculous too, especially as he got older. And those delts dwarf even Levroni's, trust me. Maybe Marcus Rule could hang with him in that area, but I don't recall anyone else with bona fide boulders quite like that. Of course, from the rear, it was always lights out, game over. He was just untouchable in pretty much every single pose from behind. Only Dorian could really hang with him when it comes to the back, but then again, Ronnie toasts him in the glutes and hams. So yeah, this is the main reason why I rank Big Ron so high, is because who else in history can boast so many dominant body parts and poses? Not to mention that combination of full round muscle mass and ripped hard conditioning, that's essentially the holy grail of professional bodybuilding right there. Even Levroni would be hard-pressed to beat him in the side chest. Ronnie was just a juggernaut here. Another major reason I don't have him any higher, however, is because it really took him a long time to kind of hit his stride. So to me, that suggests it's not just great genetics, but a ton of hard work that finally saw him live up to all his promise. Plus, for what it's worth, I don't think you can be said to have the greatest genetics of all time with a subpar set of calves and a four-pack. That's just my 2 cents, though. Still, Ronnie at his best, like what we saw in 1998 and 99 and 2003, is just an unstoppable force. Even Big Ramy or Phil Heath, I don't think would be capable of beating these versions of him. So needless to say, Ronnie was the sort of genetic freak that only comes along maybe once a generation or two. And speaking of Phil Heath, here he is all the way up at number 2. Yeah, I bet you didn't see that one coming. And man, judging by the comments in the last video, a lot of you guys really hate him, huh? Poor guy. Now, I'd be lying if I said I never criticized him before myself, but I don't blindly hate on him. And you'd have to be somewhat of a biased hater to deny his stellar genetics. Now, true, I did just say that I don't think he could beat Ronnie in his prime, but that doesn't change the fact that I would still argue that Phil has the better genetics of the two, if only very slightly. I mean, for one thing, he doesn't train half as hard as Ronnie did, let's be honest there, that's no secret. So it's no wonder why they call him the gift, right? For another thing, Phil is probably the most complete bodybuilder there's ever been, when you go body part for body part and consider how excellent he is in every single muscle group. Literally, his only weaknesses are his abs and narrow clavicles, that's it. His detractors might be quick to point out his infamous bubble gut, which is exaggerated by the way. It was really only bad that 1 year, but in any case, guys, need I repeat myself again? A bubble gut is not genetic. So like I said before, that's a result of drug abuse and diet, so we can't ding him for that here. Perhaps the only other guy with fewer flaws, in my opinion, is Sean Ray. But then again, Sean was never as strong as Phil in certain areas either, namely the forearms, the calves, shoulders, and back. I mean, just look at Phil's forearms here. I've said it before and I'll say it again, they literally look like upside down calves, man. It's just like softballs lodged under his skin there. It's unreal. And just like Ray before him, Phil also has that same paper-thin skin that allows us to discern every little detail of his muscles. So that's genetic to an extent as well, not just diet or prep related. So this is what helps him whip thicker-skinned opponents like Kai when it comes to the conditioning. And you could tell Phil had some serious potential even back in his college days. Look at his shoulders and triceps already here. That's some pretty good shape and muscle tone for a basketball player, that's for sure. But then he goes and transforms into what we see now, like just damn, man. Obviously, he's a great responder to gear and resistance training, just like Levroni was. So love him or hate him, you can't deny he's supremely gifted and his body reacts extremely favorably to anabolics and insulin. I mean, we've all seen his workouts. Is he training with the intensity of a Dorian Yates or a Ronnie Coleman? I don't think so. But he doesn't need to. Who else walks into their very first Mr. Olympia and places third? Then, nearly 3 years later, he eclipses his one-time mentor and friend Jay Cutler, one of the best and most accomplished bodybuilders in history. In 2011, Phil was already displaying more quality definition and complete development than Jay, who'd been in the game with roughly 20 years of training under his belt at the time, mind you. It's just insane. In one of my past videos, I gave Phil the honorable distinction of having the best, most muscular in history, and can you guys really argue that, looking at this picture? Even if you think somebody else takes it, he's definitely way, way up there. Now, some people might point out that his back was a genetic weak point early on, and so how can he be ranked so high when that's the most important muscle group for bodybuilding? Well, I disagree. I don't think that his back was ever truly weak. It might have been underdeveloped and lacking in thickness, but go back to 05 or 06 and you can already see the potential is there. His muscle insertions and detail were clearly evident even then, so it was just a matter of bringing up the mass and thickness and boom, you suddenly got arguably the best back double bicep of all time. Now, before we get to number 1 though, let's just briefly run through some honorable mentions real quick. I'm just going to list off another 10 guys because there's just been so many gifted bodybuilders throughout history, and I could easily rattle off another 10 on top of that. But in the interest of keeping this video under an hour, I'll cap it there. So first off, we got to give a shout out to the 212 Mr. O, Flex Lewis. In many ways like the mini version of Phil because he's also the most complete bodybuilder in his division, with a great back and arms and the same shredded glutes and dry conditioning that Phil brings. We also got to show some love for marvelous Melvin Anthony. I actually had him making the cut instead of Dexter originally, but when I thought about it more, I just couldn't leave Dexter off. But Melvin, if anything, had even prettier lines and maybe even a better back than Dex. I don't know, man. It's definitely very close between these two. And some of you are probably wondering, how could an 8-time Mr. Olympia in Lee Haney be absent? Surely a guy who's won as many Sandow's as Ronnie Coleman had some of the greatest genetics the world has ever seen, right? Well, not quite, in my humble opinion. Haney, just like Ronnie, had a rather inferior split-ab 4-pack, and unlike Ronnie, his arms were relatively undersized compared to that massive back. His legs were also nothing too special, so that's why, even though I think he's fantastic and had one of the best physiques ever, I wouldn't put Haney in the top 10. The real deal, Chris Cormier. This guy's nickname says it all. He was legit, and just like his fellow 90s bodybuilder Sean Ray or Phil Heath, he really doesn't have a weak body part. The reason I didn't include Cormier in the top 10, however, isn't because he wasn't great. It's because everyone who currently made it, I feel, is simply better, and there just wasn't enough room to fit everybody. So Victor Martinez is another bodybuilder with some premium genetics. He had mass, shape, and pretty complete development, although his underwhelming legs and less than ideal insertions in the triceps and lats are enough to convince me he's not quite top 10 material. Jay Cutler's another guy you might be thinking of. He had perhaps the best quads ever when you factor in the deep cuts and all the feathering, also some amazing delts and calves, and one of the widest backs too. He was also super complete for a mass monster. But Jay's lack of detail in the back and the wide, blocky midsection, these flaws are really just too big to ignore, and so I don't think he fares that well, genetically speaking, compared to the other guys on this list. And I knew at least a couple of you would bring up Victor Richards, that 90s phenom who never competed, but everyone says made Dorian Yates look small that one time in a guest posing. Please, man. Well, maybe he did, but size in the off-season means very little. He would have got smoked if he competed against Dorian back in the day because he was very gifted, no doubt, but to my eyes, he's nothing but an inferior version of Paul Dillette, because he was also disproportionately weak from the back. Since we've never seen this guy in a true pro contest, I don't think it's fair to put him ahead of anybody else on here. Not that I'm saying he wasn't great, don't get it twisted, but it's much easier to look impressive in pictures like this in natural lighting and stuff, not in a contest, so I take all his photos with a grain of salt. And Zach Kahn kind of falls into a similar boat, although he did actually step on stage several times. He never did so at the highest levels, and so I can't put him in the top 10. Though he did have killer genetics, no doubt, and some of the craziest arms and delts I've ever laid eyes on, as you can see from this pic right here. I don't even know, this looks photoshopped to me. Apologies if it is. Anyway, Serge Nubret, I could easily see an argument being made in his favor. I'm surprised nobody mentioned him, actually, because he had such amazing shape and roundness for his day. Aesthetically speaking, even Frank Zane couldn't hold a candle to this if you ask me. Honestly, if I knew more about the guy, maybe I would have had him on here. And lastly, who could forget about Arnold, the most famous and beloved of them all? Well, brace yourselves, because despite how terrific he looks in countless photos like this, I don't consider Arnold's genetics to be all that great, actually. Blasphemy, I know. But he simply had way too many flaws and weak body parts compared to the rest of these guys. In fact, I'll point some of them out to you in a second, because now we finally come to number 1. And I bet a lot of you guys, especially you youngsters, didn't see this one coming. Because we're talking about the myth, Sergio Oliva. Yeah, that's right. Even though physique-wise, Sergio might fall short in a lot of ways compared to the other bodybuilders we've just seen, you've got to remember he competed literally half a century ago. Back in the 60s, man, even before Arnold's heyday. They barely knew what steroids were back then, let alone HGH, insulin, or IGF-1. Hell, even supplements were next to nothing and extremely limited. Yet who else in history can pull off this pose like Sergio? Nobody, man. Not even Lee Priest looks this good in it. So for that reason, I would call the victory pose the hardest pose to hit in all of bodybuilding, even more difficult than the crucifix or the vacuum. You really need God-level genetics for this one. Simply put, Oliva was light years ahead of his competition. Even his own son, decades later, just pales in comparison, despite all the advances to drugs and training and nutrition and supplementation. So that really speaks volumes right there. And now we come back to Arnold. So fanboys, please cover your ears. You're not going to like this. Now, Arnold might beat Sergio in a couple areas here. The biceps for one, and he's got better separation between the bis and tris. He's also got a more massive torso with that super full rib cage, and that partial vacuum he's hitting is a nice touch and really helps draw the eye. But structurally speaking, Arnold can't hang with Sergio, straight up. Look at the waistlines. Sergio's is significantly smaller. The legs as well. Sergio's are bigger with better sweep. Even his calves look bigger here. And then there's the triceps. Arnold's look pretty good, I will admit, but Sergio's are just fuller, they're meatier, and his forearms are also better than the Oaks. And because of his more slender waist, his V-taper is more exaggerated too. The lats just flare out like a cobra. And here's another one of Sergio exploiting him in a front lat spread. This was never one of Arnold's stronger poses, and next to someone like Sergio, forget about it. Now, don't get it twisted, guys. I'm not saying that Sergio was a better bodybuilder than your hero Arnold, okay? He wasn't. Arnold had more polish, better presentation, and I would even argue better aesthetics. And I think most people would agree with that. Plus, he won a buttload more titles than Sergio ever did, so there's no question as to who was the better bodybuilder. But this video isn't about success or legacy, it's about pure raw genetics, and in that regard I think Sergio is vastly superior. Even Arnold himself has admitted as much. The way he ultimately overcame Sergio was by outworking him, outsmarting him, putting in way more effort into the posing and everything. So, because Sergio Oliva's proportions and muscle insertions were second to none, his level of mass and total body development was so far ahead of the curve, it would make your head spin to go back in time and witness this guy for the first time. It's just that we've all grown so accustomed to seeing these modern-day mutant lab freaks that an old-school physique like this is positively underwhelming by comparison. But you had to put it in perspective and take into account the time period in which he competed in order to truly appreciate what a freak of nature he really was. In fact, the guy barely dieted. Sergio himself claimed that throughout his career, he only started dieting 3 weeks out from a show. Otherwise, he could eat basically whatever he wanted and burn it off in like 2 hours because his metabolism was so fast. So that's absolutely unheard of for a bodybuilding champion to barely diet, and a testament to his supreme genetics. And you want to say Victor Richards was massive for his day? Look at Sergio packing the same level of beef like 3 decades earlier. This is stupid crazy mass, even by today's standards. Somebody please let me know what year this pic was taken, because I'm not sure, but love to hear. It's got to be in the late 60s, early 70s at most, and man, it's just mind-blowing to think that anybody could get this huge back then. But anyway, that's all for this one, guys. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments if you agree with this top 5, or if not, who would you have chosen? And don't forget to leave a like or subscribe for more if you want to see more stuff like this. Also, stay tuned, because I'm probably going to do a follow-up vid about the guys with the worst genetics, or at least the top bodybuilders who overcame subpar genetics. Because let's face it, the guys with the truly terrible genetics never make it anywhere close to the Olympia level, and we never hear of them. Aside from maybe this Big Lenny character, but anyway, there's definitely some very accomplished bodybuilders who weren't blessed with the ideal genetic makeup, but who were nonetheless able to achieve a lot of success through hard work and determination, politics, and all that. So be on the lookout for that one. But until next time, guys, I'm the Tominator, signing off, and I'll be back.